American wealth. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people hired by this industry. And also on top of that, there are trillions of dollars of wealth being generated. Now, how is that money being generated is the important question to ask. Okay? It plays a fairly significant role in our GDP. Why? It should not exist. Let's watch the Caspian Report. How the UK is becoming a third world country.
One of the wealthiest urban areas in the world. Its economy is worth roughly £508 billion, which equals $652 billion. If it were an independent state, London would rank as the 22nd largest economy in the world, precisely above Argentina and Sweden. However, London's prosperity and that of Southeast England is atypical for the country. This small area makes up nearly half the UK's GDP while having about a third of its population. If one were to amputate London's output, it would reduce British living standards by 14%, just enough to slip ahead of the US state of Mississippi. Yeah, the UK has seen better days. The last 10 years have been particularly tough. Real disposable income, which is income after taxes and benefits.
What? Buying $202 shirts on Shein, it has nothing to do with having or not having health insurance, and Americans have $200 to blow because $200 is just never going to buy them a surgery or have any other use for it. When you are a poor American, except spend it. What? I don't think that is a reasonable bargain. I will never advocate for that. I think it's far better for Americans to have far better for Americans to not be so reliant on debt and have far less disposable income while simultaneously have all of their incredibly important needs met by the government. That is a big part of my advocacy. Yeah. Yes, the chatter was agreeing with me. Having lived in California, Hong Kong, London, and Northern England, my quality of life was actually best in Northern England, surprisingly.
Has remained almost unchanged. The cost of goods and services has gone up. Compared to a decade ago, people can buy less with their income. Meanwhile, productivity is low.
But yeah, I don't think that it's because $400 won't buy you good healthcare here. There's nothing to spend it on but dumb shit like TVs. I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. I think the government doesn't circulate money better in this country in terms of like taxes. That's for sure. Taxes that would then fund very important social safety nets, because if you fund social safety nets and the government controls them, at most it is going to be a depressive force on the profits that the private sector can make, and at best it would eradicate the private sector in its entirety. That means a big part of that GDP is going away, okay? Health insurance is the greatest example of this. I talked about it extensively with the Luigi Mangione saga, if you recall. Healthcare, for-profit healthcare insurance in this country is a ginormous part of the American American output, okay? American wealth. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people hired by this industry. And also on top of that, there are trillions of dollars of wealth being generated. Now, how is that money being generated is the important question to ask, okay? It plays a fairly significant role in our GDP. Why? It should not exist. How does it make this money? It makes this money by playing the role of a shitty mediator that actually increases cost across the board. Cost that is carried over to the consumer, and its lack of interest in like actually meaningfully tackling the cost on the pharmaceutical side, because it has no interest in actually lowering prices on the purchasing side. As a matter of fact, sometimes it directly owns the pharmaceutical providers, or at least has like an additional revenue opportunity on the pharmaceutical side with the pharmacy benefit managers, as we've talked about as well. So it is not in the interest of the private healthcare industry to have the federal government regulate this in any way, or even create a competitive product in any significant fashion, because that would ruin their reason of existence. That would ruin the way that they make money. Okay, GDP don't go up fixing a pothole. It does go up if you blow a tire. What's that meme of the two economists that talk to one another? One economist, what is it? One economist takes a shit in a bag, okay, and then sells it to the other economist. And the other economist, it's like a classic meme. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. It's a classic. Oh, here. Okay, here it is. Two economists are walking in a forest when they come across a pile of shit. The first economist says to the other, "I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of shit." The second economist takes the $100 and eats the pile of shit. They continue walking until they come across a second pile of shit. The second economist turns to the first and says, "I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of shit." The first economist takes the $100 and eats the pile of shit. Walking a little more, the first economist looks at the second and says, "You know, I gave you $100 to eat shit. Then you gave me back that same $100 to eat that shit. I can't help but feel like we just both ate shit for nothing." "That's not true," responds the second economist. "We increased the GDP by $200. So a lot of the stuff that you consider to be completely unproductive and maybe directly at odds with the flourishing of the working class of the United States of America are actually making a lot of money. A number is going up somewhere. The healthcare industry is profoundly important for our GDP, even though it should not exist." Think about that. So much of the American economy is geared towards creating unnecessary middlemen. Unnecessary middlemen that will have pay stubs. Unnecessary middlemen that will drive up the cost. This hypothetical excludes the existence of coprophile economists. This is erasure. Okay. I say I am not even against inefficiency in the economy. Okay. As long as it is at the behest of the overall public good. Okay. Inefficiencies such as maintaining the same labor force while improving the work conditions to maximize their efficiency and make them do less work so they have more free time. Okay? This is inherently anti-capitalist. This concept is inherently anti-capitalist. What do you mean? You're going to work 2 hours instead of 8 and get the same output and get paid the same? This makes no sense. If someone can do 2 hours, if someone used to do the same work for 10 hours and now is doing the same exact work for 2 hours, that means you can eliminate 5 jobs. You can eliminate 4 other people's jobs and then make that one guy do the job of 5. Inefficiency is universally bad and automation is essential to human development. What? Correct and based economist. I agree. That's why we must embrace automation. Inefficiency is universally bad and automation is essential for human development. I do not have a problem. Okay, bro, you are on the consumption leaderboard. You definitely chase it. Okay, once again, people I don't think understand what my personal worldview is, so they mistake it for what they think it is, and then they think it is at odds with what I'm with what I'm advocating for or the way I live my life. Okay, I do not have an issue with consumption. I am not anti-consumption. There has never been a point in my career where you can point to me saying consumption is bad, okay? As a matter of fact, I've often talked about the most successful mechanism of invisible control that neoliberalism has applied to its completely servile domestic population. It is consumption that keeps people occupied. It is consumption that makes people feel like their lives are better. If you want to understand why Americans are so servile, it's because they have burger. It's because they have gun. It's because they have burger gun. It's because they have cheap TV. Okay? And if you understand that any government has to, at a base level, after giving their citizens basic material needs for them to thrive, that they also have to keep them preoccupied and to a certain degree, then you understand that consumption is a very successful way of doing that. If you don't actually offer these goods for people to purchase and to keep them preoccupied, you end up having riots over not being able to get fucking coffee beans, okay? It's not because I'm a selfish hedonist that I advocate for this, okay? Inefficiency is bad, lol. Inefficiency is bad. Inefficiency, the chatter isn't wrong. Inefficiency isn't bad, but it has to be defined. Output input means nothing without context. Output shouldn't be profit. It should be good. That's the difference between the capitalists and the leftists. Yes, inefficiency of that sort, if you set the standard of what it means for inefficiency, then yes, because one can also make the argument that hyper efficient economics from a capitalist perspective it requires the gutting of the existing labor force, which then means that the purchasing power goes down, which then means that the existing labor force does not have an opportunity to make meaningful wages. And yes, if you compare it to like a Sudanese person, the American purchasing power is significantly fucking higher, but year over year, their purchasing power goes down as well, and their quality of life goes down as well. That is inherently inefficient unless you are hyper focusing on short-term profits. That's it. Short-term profits for a select few. Inefficiency is bad, said the middle manager whose boss, another middle manager, was telling him to cut costs by laying off 4 more workers and dividing the work between the rest at no extra pay. Exactly. I don't know why, but the first thing that comes into mind when seeing that title is the racist quote I see online: import the third world, become the third world. Is it true? Yeah, no, that's just like a completely pure idealistic racist nonsense. Import the third world, become the third world is idiotic. There is no material difference between a person that was born in the third world and a person that was born in fucking London, okay? The only difference is one has access to more goods and a better education system and more amenities than the other. There is nothing that makes people different than one another aside from their, spawn point. Your spawn point dictates your future in pretty significant ways. And you can recognize this by looking at your own neighborhoods. Okay? I'll use not the example of the South Side of Chicago, but instead a white example so that racists can understand this as well. Do you think that if you are born into a relatively wealthy or maybe an upper middle class family in a Connecticut neighborhood and have access to the best education and also don't have to fucking work while you're going to school and don't ever have to worry about your finances, do you think that spawn point is going to offer more opportunities to you than the white child born into a fucking family that was already crippled by fentanyl after losing their goddamn jobs in the mine in West Virginia? Do you think that there is something fundamentally different about the white child born in a West Virginia suburb than the white child born in Connecticut? Well, J.D. Vance thinks so. He thinks that the Appalachian mind is simply primitive, but I don't, okay? I don't. I understand that there is unlimited potential all around the world, and it is up to us to unlock it. If you want to think about it with this like technocratic approach, because many of you European social democrats especially love that shit, you can think about it from that perspective. Okay? Hot take here, don't ban me, dude, but I think if jobs are automated, wouldn't that cause some sort of Darwinist selection of the population? I might be wrong. It's a new thought. What? I mean, Darwinist theories don't work under capitalism. You're not actually creating a structure where the fittest survive. You're actually creating a structure where the poor die at a higher clip than the rich. That's it. Social Darwinism is the exact opposite of what I was talking about just now, that there is nothing inherently or intrinsically different between people born to genuinely different circumstances.
One of the lowest of any major economy, and housing has become nearly unaffordable, with the UK holding the record for the highest number of homeless people in the developed world.
Yeah, I wonder why that. Perhaps the London economy has something to do with that. Okay? And that is true. Okay? The reason why London experiences incredibly high rates of homelessness and also pretty decently high rates of poverty and crime is because the housing market is dog shit. And when the housing market is dog shit, the London economy, in theory, thrives. Okay? The cost of the average house goes up. Higher number. Better looking on the graph. But people suffer as a direct consequence of that because they get priced out of the housing market.
The cause for these issues is rooted in past political decisions. Britain has slumbered and stumbled its way through a number of setbacks. Now, the crisis has become endemic with no quick fix in sight. When you think about it, it's
because to get a good career in the UK, you were pretty much funneled into London. I mean, this is a identical issue to what Japan is facing as well in terms of its own economy. Okay? Relative wages are highest in big city centers, and that causes people to internally migrate. That is the same everywhere. It's the same in America too. It's the same in Canada. It's the same virtually everywhere. Well, with the exception of countries that don't treat housing as a speculative asset, but instead thinks about housing as a necessity for survival.
It's ironic, the UK to industrialize. Now,
it happens in every developed country except for one. Don't make me say it. Don't make me say it. There's another country that is in the heart of Europe that also has been able to overcome these issues. That country is, of course, Austria, at least Vienna. But that's because 65% of their housing is public. There's a couple other countries that also have been able to overcome these issues despite developing, but their understanding of like a land lease agreement is diametrically the opposite of Western capitalist nations. But in terms of developed nations, in terms of developing nations that resemble developed nations in many of their big cities like China, you know, it's all a matter of what the government thinks of housing. It's entirely dictated by what the role housing plays.
It stands to become the first to deindustrialize. Seen from a larger angle, Britain's economy is on a downward trajectory. Prices are rising too fast. Just recently, housing prices rose by more than £2,200 in a month. Unfortunately, this wasn't widely reported in the media. Looking at things from all angles is what we do, and Ground News provides us with invaluable insights to do exactly that. That's why we reached out to them to sponsor this video. In fact, reading this on Ground News, I can see only 10 sources covered it, which goes to show how overlooked this subject is. What's more, less than 10% of the outlets were from government sources. One might suppose governments don't want to talk about complications at home. Now, our type of content is not really suitable for YouTube. The algorithm deems it too controversial, and so many of our videos go without monetization. That's why we rely on sponsors to keep producing these videos. We've personally used and worked with Ground News for years, and they've stepped up every time we needed support. In fact, we have our own feed on Ground News. Here, you get breaking news on geopolitics and even blind spot stories that the media isn't covering. Our missions align, so I encourage you to check it out at ground.news/Caspian. I recommend subscribing to the Vantage plan. Our link gets you 40% off. Keep in mind that by subscribing, you are directly supporting our channel. Not long ago, Britain was considered one of the world's most prosperous nations and a prime destination for skilled professionals seeking to advance their careers. Today, not so much. The state is under incredible socio-economic strain, more so than people realize. 3 back-to-back geopolitical shockwaves have left it with a colossal debt.
Why is this Bolshevik scumbag still free? That's amazing. Dude, Euro chatters are so funny. I don't think I've ever been called a Bolshevik as a pejorative. I'm gonna give you points for an old way of an old terminology. Czarist chatter. Yeah. Gary's Economics, a former trader from London, and describes the problem perfectly. Can I post a link to his video? Do you know Gary's Economics? No. He's doing the historical example of the real existing historical example of like of someone that undermined previous ways of thinking and that was completely shut out from the conversation. And those who carried the torch of this kind of research were actively undermined and pushed away and murdered sometimes for developing the alternative ways of thinking, which ended up being the truth, by the way. Okay. What the fuck is Orb? You keep saying Orb. Orb is an anime about a scientific development around the heliocentric model that like under the watchful eye of the church. It's an anime that fictionalizes. It's an anime that fictionalizes basically the process. The manga is set in 15th century P Kingdom. People who suggest ideas in opposition to the teachings of the C religion, which is Christianity, by the way, and it's the Inquisition, such as that the earth revolves around the sun, are considered heretics and are tortured or burned at the stake. Rafal, a child prodigy with an interest in astronomy, is forced by Hubert, a scholar and heretic, to assist him in his research for the movement of the earth theory. Okay? When Nowak, an inquisitor, finds a diagram drawn by Rafal showing a heliocentric model, Hubert claims responsibility and is executed. It's one of the things that Hubert says that I really love is that there are no wrong answers, right? Like a wrong answer can still lead you to the truth. And I think that's a wonderful way to approach both the rest of this anime, and I'm not going to spoil the rest of it. This is like first and second episode shit, so shut the fuck up, chatters. But yeah, it's about how difficult it is to shatter dogmatic approaches.
Right. But before him, everybody thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system. I guess it probably wasn't called the solar system at that time, but and everything traveled around that, including the sun. And they had developed these really complicated mathematical systems of making that work. And the way that works is that all the other planets, they have to do like loop the loops and spinning around. It's the only way that it works to make sense. So all of these guys spent like their whole lives working out these complicated mathematical models of how everything goes around the Earth. And then a guy came and said, actually, things don't go around the Earth. And he was, you know, he was massively, massively attacked. Nobody wanted to accept it because you have all of these prestigious academics who've spent their whole life developing models of how things travel around the Earth. I think that's kind of basically where we are now. And if I was right in saying that these guys are just missing the big thing, what would you expect? You would expect, basically, that their models wouldn't work in the sense that they would constantly generate.
And it's funny because, like, it's obvious that the models don't work. If the models fucking worked, then we would not have a boom-bust cycle. We would not have, like, great periods of economic downturn. Like, that's the other part of this, which is that, like, when economic predictions fail, and they do quite frequently, it's not exactly invisible either. You immediately feel the long-lasting, tangible impact. But because we are so dogmatic in our approach to capitalism, and it's such a wrong answers lead you to the truth, is that how you cope with getting absolutely cooked by the debate master Jordan Lee Peterson? Jesse Lee Peterson, yes. Anyway, I fear that in times of instability, a lot of people operate in cultish ways and approach the subject by reaffirming their loyalty to the previous dogmatic ways of thinking. Dude, I love Richard Wolff. He's great, but I'm not going to listen to him talk about the dialectic of work for an hour, dude. What are we talking about? Calm down, okay? This is already long enough. Many chatters already left because they said they were fucking bored. And now you want me to listen to Richard Wolff for an hour? Like, come on. Lock in.
Incorrect predictions. And that is exactly what happens. These guys consistently generate incorrect predictions. So, you know, I've spoken about it many times on this channel, and I'll speak about it on the next video on the course. My job was to predict interest rates. And interest rates are, modern economists are basically obsessed with interest rates. Before 2008, they basically thought you could solve pretty much any modern economic problem by just making sure you get that interest rate right. And if you look at the way that our economists react to financial crises and economic crises, how do they?
Guys, once again, I'm going to repeat this, but I know better than you do on what carries the attention of 30,000 individuals, okay? Please stop. Like, this already is close to the boundaries of what is allowed on this broadcast. We've probably passed that boundary from my own estimation, okay?
They react to 2008, slash the interest rate. How did they react to COVID, slash the interest rate? How did they react to the inflationary spike after COVID? Rocket the interest rate up. This is basically where our economists sit at the moment, which is the way to deal with any economic crisis is to manipulate the interest rate. So the interest rate is like their key tool that they use, basically. And yet, what are their predictions for their own interest rate like? So I was a professional interest rate trader from 2008 until 2014. In 2008, after the financial crisis, interest rates were slashed to zero in basically the whole of the rich world. Nobody predicted that. That was a surprise. And because they believe that low interest rates are very economically stimulative, they thought that rates would come up again the next year. They didn't. They then said in 2009, well, we were wrong this year, but rates will come up next year. They didn't. In 2010, they said rates go up in 2011. They didn't. And they continued to predict rates to go up every single year up until 2020 in the middle of COVID. Every single one of those predictions were incorrect. And then they finally said in the midst of COVID, now inflation is so low and will stay so low for so long, interest rates will never go up again. And interest rates immediately went up to 5-6%. So, you know, I know when I come out and say inequality is the big thing, and you live in a world full of economists that say, oh, the problem is things to do with the interest rate, things to do with levels of government spending, things to do with levels of taxation, I can sound like a bit of a quack, basically. Why is this guy saying the problem is one thing when all of these prestigious elite economists aren't mentioning it? Well, they're an educational system which never talks about it, and their predictions are constantly wrong. Whereas if you don't.
The same goes for foreign policy as well. If you're a constant naysayer of like American imperialism, the one time where your prediction might be incorrect, maybe let's say you're Noam Chomsky and you talked about the Khmer Rouge and said, hold on, let's wait for official data to come out. They'll constantly bring that up 60 years later, okay? Or let's say you're a dumbass Twitch streamer who said, Russia would never invade Ukraine. They'll constantly bring that up. You can be wrong all the time, on the other hand, as long as you are wrong alongside a pro-American imperialist position. The one time where you're wrong, on the other hand, against the American imperialist position, everyone will constantly look to that and constantly point to that to try and fucking undermine your very accurate assessment of the situation time and time again. Look no further than every single pro-Israel content creator, okay? Look no further than every single pro-Israel content creator. Every step of the way, pro-Israeli accounts that are in legacy publishers or that are in independent media have been wrong on every account. Their assessment was incorrect. Their analysis was totally wrong. And every single thing that they said about the potential, about the future of this conflict was incredibly wrong. I, on the other hand, was right every step of the way. And it's not because I have some crazy fucking future sight or whatever. It's because I was looking at previous actions. But it does not matter that they were wrong every step of the way, because they were wrong in the correct way. Okay? That's it. They were wrong in a way where it corresponded to the overall biases that a lot of other people are being socially conditioned into believing. Okay? That's it. The reason why I brought up this analogy, which is somewhat self-serving, is because the same thing happens in the field of economics. Okay? Gotta call this white guy wrong in our post DEI. What are you talking about? Okay, man, calm down. Take an hour off, you know? Take a breather. The point is, economists are wrong all the time. They're wrong so consistently, but they're wrong within the confines of permissible, the permissible concepts. They're wrong within the confines of, they're wrong in favor of being pro-capitalism. And if you're wrong when you're pro-capitalism, then that's fine. It's, you know, some people get stuff wrong all the time. They're a part of the in-group. Okay? That's it.
I correctly predicted interest rates after the 2008 crisis, but I've also correctly predicted things on this channel. If you go back and look at the first video on this channel, which we'll link in the description, I predicted in the beginning of COVID there would be an inflationary crisis, cost of living crisis, a huge spike in the stock price, the gold price, house prices, a huge increase in inequality.
I'll give you one example, okay? Famines under socialist developing nations that want to abide by a socialist model are considered death campaigns directly caused to kill as many people as possible, okay? Regardless of what the material conditions in that country looks like, regardless of famines being a widespread problem at that point in time all around the globe, okay? It's never simply mismanagement. Although we have an abundance of food now with technological improvements, okay, there are still 14 million people that die due to famine-related issues every single year under a global capitalist structure. But why do those people die? It's not because of the system. It's not because of mismanagement when we have abundance. It's actually the individual's fault. Okay? Even when famine is man-made, deliberately created to kill people, with the intent to kill people, if it is done by a capitalist superpower, then it's still not the same degree of immorality of that is mismanagement under a socialist form of governance. Okay? Okay, it's not 14 million, it's 9 million every year now. My apologies. Well, at least in 2021 it was. In World of Wealth, 9 from hunger. Okay? So what else is wrong? Science, history, academic fields filled with the smartest people in the world who have dedicated millions of hours to studying it. You sound like a right-winger denying experts. Wait, what? Brother, this is one field. And I'm saying that we have a dogmatic approach. There are alternative models out there, and we purposefully refuse to look at it out of the fear that it would undermine the current order of business in a way that is not dissimilar to previous dogmatic approaches to ways of thinking that we now understand is wrong. There's someone who is, there are a lot of powerful individuals who are slated to make money this way. They do not want to disrupt the existing hierarchy. The fastest growth in history of humanity were Soviet Union and China. Sorry, chatters, these are just facts. I mean, it's true. I'm also using analogies that pertain to your modern day existence that you can look at, because inequality exists everywhere. Okay? That's why I use the example of the neighborhood in West Virginia versus neighborhood in Connecticut. I'm using analogies that you can also comprehend. You can extrapolate from the existing inequality that you can see with your own two eyes, or inequality that you have experienced, okay, that you have lived through, and then look at a global paradigm, because it works in a similar capacity.
All of these things have happened. So I know it's easy to dismiss somebody, especially somebody who doesn't come from a rich, privileged background, saying the elites are wrong on this. But the elites are continually generating incorrect predictions. And I'm generating correct predictions here. So I think that what we have at the moment is essentially a broken education system in economics. But there's more to it than that. And the second reason why we don't speak about inequality in economics enough is because we have a system which aggressively takes anybody who is good at predictions out of the conversation. And to explain this, I want you to put yourself in the mind of a young 20, 21-year-old economic student, loves economics, loves the maths, studying at loads at an elite university. You graduate, whatever it is, magna cum laude or whatever, you're top of your class, and then you have to decide what you want to do with your life. So if you want to be in this conversation, if you want to be an academic, or if you want to be advisor to government, or if you want to work in public policy, you had to stay in academia. You can't just do an undergrad. You're going to have to do a master's. It's going to cost you a lot of money. You're going to do a PhD. You're going to have to work, spend money, locked in libraries. If you're lucky, you might start making money in your mid-30s. Or
9 million people dying out of 8 billion is nothing. If we're being nitpicky, is crazy, dude. It's not 9 million people dying because famine is still obviously fucking widespread and a problem that we haven't solved. It's 9 million people dying from hunger out of 8 billion at a time of abundance. Okay? This cannot be seen as anything but an act of sheer cruelty. The only problem here is that it is not profitable. Okay? It's simply not profitable. That's it. It's a logistics problem. That's a crazy way to approach 9 million people dying every year. That's incredible. I mean, if you can cast aside 9 million people dying every year, then honestly, you can agree to a lot of stuff, you know? A post-Keynesian Marxist-leaning economist was said to be wrong about sellers' inflation because of short-term profit seeking. What if we're thinking about inflation all wrong? Isabella Weber's heterodox ideas about government price controls are transforming policy in the United States and across Europe. Your window is closing. No, it's not. You've read your last free article, you freeloader. 8 billion people don't die every year. Wait, what? Yeah, they don't. I agree. The entire population of the planet don't die every year. You've read your last free article, bucko.
Or you can go into the city. Not only does it pay you way, way, way more, but it gives you the opportunity to prove, look, I'm good because I can make predictions. And academia doesn't really care if you can make good predictions. So one thing which was really clear to me in my time in the city and my time in academia is if you're really, really good, you want to be in the city. Because if you're making good predictions, you will be recognized, you will be paid, and everybody will know that is the guy over there who is right, because they're really aggressively analyzing who is the guy who's making good predictions. They're tracking that and they're paying that.
But if the field of economics is so bad and gets everything wrong, then why do corporations and institutions crave elite economists so much? Wait, what? Dude, I don't think you understand. They are operating within the confines of the pre-existing system. Yes, it's a self-reinforcing cycle. That's the entire point of his video, by the way. Like, you misunderstood the entire point of the video from an econ expert, by the way. This is a person who does have the qualifications that you demand. And your reaction to this, your immediate antagonistic reaction to this is ironically the point that he's also making, which is that any kind of heterodox thinking is immediately cast aside by those who have obviously sunk a lot of time into thinking this way, and even those who have sunk no time into this way, but have basically decided through all of the social conditioning that this is the best possible fucking way of going forward. That's it. Also, I think you're mistaken like economists for, you know, quants or like actual math majors who I think even have a more soulless approach to the process somehow.
Whereas when I went back to academia in 2017, I had, you know, my first lecture at Oxford, and it was about interest rates. And I thought, you know, this is really interesting, right? You know, this is the thing which we've predicted really badly for 10, 15 years. This is the specific area I worked in. This is the area I'm an expert on. Like, it's really interesting, right? Like, if you are at elite university and you're studying something really important, and we've been wrong about it for 10, at that time it was 10 years, now it's more like 15 years. This is interesting, right? This is like a kind of like an unsolved problem. Like, if there's a thing that we're really bad at, you know, we can work out why we're bad at it. So I went to the professor, I said, why do you think we've been wrong about interest rates for 10 years? And he said, no, we always knew interest rates would stay zero, which is, you know, categorically wrong. And I went back and I showed him the data and I said, look, you've actually been wrong for 10 years. And he said, oh, that's interesting. You know, it never went anywhere. So what this shows is if you're good at predicting, which means you're good at working out why other people are wrong, the city will pay you. Academia won't even notice. It won't even notice. So what does this tell you about academia's ability to improve? Like, if these guys are able to be wrong year after year after year after year for 10 years and not even notice, they're not going to improve. They're not going to improve, basically. So what you have is a situation where anyone who is good and wants to make money is aggressively paid to leave. And if you're good and you stay, even if you are able to correctly identify an area where everyone is consistently wrong, they don't really care and they're not going to listen. So what kind of person stays in academia when they know that if they're good, they will do much better and get paid much better leaving academia and going into finance? Basically, people from rich families. It doesn't make sense to do that if you're not from a rich family. Like, if you have the option, you know, I made millions of pounds in the city, and you know, that is what paid for this flat. And you know, when my brother needed to buy a house, I helped him. My sister's trying to buy a house, I'm helping her. Like, people from ordinary families cannot afford to make that choice if they're good. Academia, you need to be either not good enough to get into finance, from a rich family, or basically a little bit mad. Like, and this is what happens. And
Gary's great, but his takes can be quite liberal. It's not like if we just got good economists to work with the government, then suddenly capitalism would be just fine. The system is far more self-replicating at a structural level to be changed in that way. I don't even know if he's actually saying that. Yeah, I think given that there is like some level of math involved in economics, I think one of the most damaging aspects of that has been this false reality that they also mistake economics with like hard science when it's very clearly not. That's it. People are like, well, it's confusing and it has math, so it must be a hard science. I don't really understand. Based on what he's saying about not needing / wanting to improve, it sounds like the idea that people not wanting to return to shopping carts, there's no reward for returning one, but what? It's neoliberalism that started pushing its view of the economy as some objective truth. Before that, it was way more diverse and everyone understood that it's mostly social science.
You have this system which kind of brainwashes people into saying inequality doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. Doesn't listen to people who are right and have ways who are demonstrably better in their predictions, and aggressively takes everybody who's half good out of the conversation.
I mean, I think one of the classic things that Noam Chomsky has talked about in terms of like the field of economics being designed around a lie is the notion of the rational actor principle, when there is a multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to making irrational choices, making consumers engage in irrational choices to begin with. Like, that in and of itself is a fairly simple way to attack the argument.
You go into finance. Obviously, then once you're in finance, you can make a lot of money making predictions, but you're not allowed to speak publicly. So when I was a trader, I was making a lot of money betting that inequality would devastate living standards and keep interest rates low and push house prices up and push stock prices up and push inequality up further. But I wasn't allowed to say anything about these things. I had another point which I need to make on this. So the third reason economists don't talk about inequality is that pretty much all powerful, influential economists are quite rich. They're quite rich. They're generally from rich families. If they weren't from rich families, they probably wouldn't have stayed in academia. Economics has the worst social representation of like different social classes of any subject in the big American universities. So you have rich people who've gone in to study this subject. They probably don't need money, otherwise they would have gone into finance. And then they get paid to work for a think tank or work for a newspaper, and they themselves are quite rich and comfortable. The people who pay them are probably quite rich. They're heavily incentivized not to talk about inequality, right? It's in a quite obvious way, which is when somebody is rich and comfortable, they want to keep things the way they are. You know, when you talk about a crisis of inequality, it hurts most people quite badly because wealth tends to concentrate at the very top. But there's a sort of, you know, the top 1%, especially top 0.1%, does really, really well. But there's like 5 or 6% at the top that benefit from that. And these guys include basically any economist with a voice. So economists are wealthy. They don't want to talk about inequality. They've got a massive amount of skin in the game saying that inequality doesn't matter. 20 years, 30 years of education studying something which has nothing to say about inequality. They need this to not be a problem. Okay, so to conclude, why do economists not talk about inequality? Primarily, it comes from an education system which completely neglects to discuss it, which means that anyone who is involved in this discussion has studied for 20 years without ever talking about this. So it basically indoctrinates them into believing this is not a problem. And also they have a massive incentive in pushing that, because otherwise their education is a waste of time. It's rich people, it works for them and their class interests. Anyone who is really good at this is paid out of the game and paid to keep their mouth shut. So basically, they're not going to fix this. So what does that mean? I'm filming this video at the back end of 2024. We had an election this year in the UK where the centre-left Labour Party beat the centre-right Conservative Party. And I think people often think that the reason that politicians do nothing about inequality is because they're representing their own interests. It's important to recognise there's kind of this whole class of slightly self-serving, slightly idiotic, very posh, very rich economists that are holding this up. And they're going to do nothing about inequality. Inequality will get worse and worse. Living standards for ordinary people will fall. And these people are not going to stop it. So the responsibility has to fall upon ordinary people themselves to stop it. When I first started talking about these things publicly in 2020, I was writing articles for newspapers. I wrote an article for The Guardian. And those articles are mainly being read by quite posh, quite privileged, quite rich people. And I was convinced that we were not going to get positive change by talking to the group of people who benefit from the growth in inequality. So I made consciously the switch to YouTube to try to do something. And that's why we're doing this channel. So I would encourage people to support, keep watching these videos. I think the next video we would do on this will be a little bit talking about my personal experience and how I came to become convinced that inequality was the problem. And then we'll keep doing